Hi everyone, today I want to talk about how to write your results section, discussion section, and conclusion questions. How exactly are we going to tell the story of what you found in your project? We'll start with comparing the results and discussion section, and we'll talk about individual examples that I have for you that really cut it down for the poster so that you can see exactly how much you have to talk and how little you have to include for everything else. The paper, by the way, write as much as you like for this kind of stuff. Just don't be repetitive. For the poster, I'm going to give you some examples based on that same uh, amphibian and frog or tadpole and golf ball example that I've been using for my other videos. And then after that, we'll talk about the conclusion because it might be a little bit different than what you've imagined. It's kind of evolved over the years, and I've learned more and more about writing conclusions uh, the way that it should be written in a scientific paper. So we'll start with the results versus discussion. Results, you're going to do the following things. You're going to identify trends in the data and compare groups inside the data, meaning that you are just telling me straight up in sentence form describing what happened in your experiment, what happened in the uh, the action of what you did, what we saw as the trend data for the prototype that you created, something along those lines. You'll also want to go ahead and quantify those changes with averages and means and modes and medians and mins and maxes, all you like, if that makes sense for your data. If it doesn't, if you have a small sample size and you don't really have a whole lot of trials, then maybe that won't make sense for you. But we want to be able to see exactly what the results in your activity, whatever it may be, were. And you want to write them out in plain English, in sentence form. You also will take an opportunity to report any statistics that you have, because this would be a good time to show off all those fancy things that you and I have been working on in our data tables. That includes t-tests or ANOVAs or descriptive statistics and stuff like that. This would be the time to report on trend data and stuff like that, and even use those statistics means comparing between the two, like the p-value and the critical t-test and stuff like that. So that's what the results section is. Results is very straightforward, just like your methods section. Whereas the discussion is kind of what you guys think of as a conclusion. You're going to interpret the results. You're going to interpret patterns and explain mechanisms that were found inside your results. You're going to connect it to the previous literature that you had. You might even connect it to new literature that you might research a little bit more on. You might spend some time addressing limitations, which would be a really good idea if you do have quite a few limitations, such as if you had a small sample size, or if we had to redesign your project for some reason of some kind. Um, and this could also be where you talk about the future directions of your paper, as in if someone was to read your paper, what should they do next? What should be the next step in this research? As well as any implications, what this could mean for a grander scale. What could this benefit for commerce versus healthcare versus biotechnology, so on and so forth. The discussion section discusses what all of these results mean. That's what it really is. Here's an example of a results section that you could write if you were doing a experiment with golf balls affecting the reproductive health of amphibians in a pond, because golf balls fly into ponds all the time. It gets to stay there and stuff. Tadpole survival decreased as golf ball leachate concentration increased. Boom. It tells you exactly what the trend in the data was. It told you as the golf ball concentration in the ponds increased, the tadpole survival decreased. And you could write it even that specifically. The control group had the highest average survival rate, while the highest concentration group had the lowest. Lower concentrations showed slight decreases compared to control, but only the highest concentration demonstrated a statistically significant difference. Notice a couple things here. Notice we outlined exactly what these trends on the data are, if there were any patterns, what were the highest, what were the lowest. I gave you a good picture without you having to read a graph or read a table what exactly happened in this study. Furthermore, I even specified which one had a statistical significant difference, judging on the fact that I used a t-test for this, for example. Now, you'll want to give a little bit more detail on exactly what statistical tests you did in your method section, because that will help your reader understand exactly what differences you are looking for. But this is a good way to summarize a results section. I would say you probably could do a little bit more because you guys are better writers. This was just off the top of my head. Here is an example of a discussion section instead. The decrease in survival with increasing leachate concentration suggests that chemicals released from golf balls may negatively affect amphibian health. Notice that this is an interpretation of the results that we had from the previous slide. Almost word for word, sentence for sentence, this matches the first sentence of the last slide here. This interprets each result. It discusses each result. The significant reduction observed at the highest concentration indicates a potential threshold effect. However, variability in lower concentrations suggests that additional trials may be needed to confirm subtle effects. Notice that my limitation is pretty much right at the end there. The significant reduction observed at the highest concentration indicates a potential threshold effect, meaning that there is some level where this caps off, that there is no more growth in the amount of reduction for concentration, that there is a specific amount that the concentration has an effect, and as concentration increases from there, it won't change anything else. This is a way for us to give context to the results and be able to tell the reader exactly what we are thinking the results mean. Whether or not that is the perfect explanation for it is up to interpretation. You're going to have readers that know a whole lot about what they're reading and be able to critique you, and you'll have readers like you were just 6 months ago, reading things for the first time, unable to really critique it until you did more background research. That is the beauty of this section. You are writing it as if you know about everything that you've done so far and use that as an interpretation of what your results mean. However, this is something that people get mixed up all the time. The discussion section is not the same as a conclusion. A conclusion closes the paper, whereas discussion section finishes the results, but it doesn't close the paper. So you might want to think of the conclusion as a different thing. Kind of like you think about it in literary terms. When you write an essay and you have your classic 5 paragraph essay, the introduction, 3 body, and a conclusion. The conclusion caps it all off, right? You don't introduce new things in the conclusion. That is what we are doing in this conclusion. It's a direct answer to the research question. As a brief summary of the key findings in your paper. It is almost like an abstract in the sense that is summarizing everything from the paper, but we're focusing specifically on closing out the results, closing out the project as a whole. It needs to be explicit in a clear takeaway. There should be no new data, no new analysis. You're telling me what is the final answer. And because of this, you might have noticed in the papers that you read that sometimes there isn't even an extra conclusion heading making it its own section. It might be that your discussion section has this culminating paragraph at the end of the paper and has a concluding statement while not actually having anything to finish out in a different section. So you might be writing your discussion section and end up writing a conclusion at the end of it without even realizing it because you're just telling me what is the final takeaway from your paper. Here's an example of a conclusion section. And I would say that your conclusion should be about a paragraph long, even if your discussion is quite short. That means that if you're only writing your poster, then yeah, you might want to think about 2 paragraphs for a discussion, with the conclusion being the second paragraph, or 1 paragraph for the discussion and 1 paragraph for the conclusion. Up to you and how you structure it. Here's an example. Exposure to golf ball leachate negatively affected amphibian tadpole survival at high concentrations. While lower concentrations saw minimal impact, the highest concentrations significantly reduced survival compared to the control. These findings indicate that chemicals released from golf balls can affect amphibian health under certain exposure conditions. It summarizes everything that both the results section and the discussion section said. It summarizes things for us completely, which means that, again, if you do feel like you do this enough in your discussion section and you end your discussion section on a concluding note, you might not need a conclusion. These are some self-check questions that you might have for yourself to be able to understand whether or not you have strayed away from writing a results section, a discussion section, or a conclusion section. For results, ask yourself, did I only describe patterns and statistics? And did I avoid explaining why? If you said the word because in the results section, you did something wrong right away. It is very plain English, right away, very direct, result-oriented sentences. It is almost like if you had someone who did not know how to read a graph, you are writing out what the graph says. A discussion section. Did you interpret the trends in the data? And did you acknowledge limitations in the results? For the conclusion, did I clearly answer my research question? Even if there is a possibility that your research question is not yet answered, this should be a statement that you make. You should say, I have yet to conclude. Well, you shouldn't say I. There is no significant conclusion that can be made from this project as of now. That answers the research question that there is work to be done still. The other question to ask yourself is, did I avoid introducing new information? Your conclusion should cap things off, not make us think more. That is really the best way to describe these 3 things. So, your results section, I'm thinking if you're writing a paper, maybe 2 to 3 paragraphs. For the poster, maybe 1 short paragraph. For the discussion section, write. If you're on the paper, if you're on the poster, maybe 1, 2 good paragraphs there at most. You know you don't have very much room for a conclusion. Maybe a paragraph, whether or not it's on the paper or poster. A longer paragraph if it's on the poster or on the paper, and a shorter paragraph if it's on the poster. And again, don't feel like you have to have the conclusion separate from everything else. That's it for this video. Please send me your drafts when you have ideas on what you want to write so that I can give you feedback along the way. I'd love to be able to give you guidance on how to word things because I know you want to write in first person. That's not the way this is written, of course. I know you want to use long, flowy language. This is not the place for that. Please give me your papers and posters for feedback whenever you can. Good luck.